Hello everyone! In the previous video, we learned how to implement a refresh token in a Blazor Web App. In today's video, I will show you the right way to implement localization with multiple languages and resource files in a Blazor Web App. Before we start, make sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of my exciting content. Now, let's get started. Before we implement localization, I will fix some issues with the refresh token in the previous video. First, go to Auth Controller. In the login method, change the expiration time to 30 minutes because we are not testing the refresh token now. In the login by refresh token method, this token expired is for the access token, and it should be 30 minutes. Then, in the generate JWT token method, also change the expiration time to 30 minutes. Second, go to the API client. We call this function every time we call the API from API service. After calling the function markUser as logged out, we need to redirect the user to the login page. So, I will inject Navigation Manager then redirect to the login page after markUser as logged out. And here also. Now let's run the app to test. Log in as a user. Go to the product list. It seems to be okay. Now let's implement localization by making a localization for this title. First, let's create resource files. Since both the Web API and Blazor app can use this resource, let's add a new project. It will be a library named Blazor App Common. Then, create a folder named Resources and create a resource file named Resource. You can see it automatically creates the designer.cs file. You can see it is an internal class, and we need this because it represents our resource, and we use it to get a specific resource file. If your Visual Studio does not create it, open Properties. In Custom Tool, change it to Public Res X File Code Generator. This will change our class to public or create the designer file if it is not created yet. Then, I will add a new resource file for the second language, named resource.fr for French. Now, in the Resource Explorer, uncheck and then check this resource. You will see the French column here. Let's add a new resource named Title. The neutral value is List Products. Actually, I don't know French, so I will put List Products in French. The resource file is okay now. Next, Let's go to Component, Pages, Product. In Index Product, inject ISTring Localizer, add a reference to the common library, then we can use Resource. Change this title to Localizer Title. Then we need to go to Program and add the service Add Localization. Here, we need a configuration to automatically set culture information for the request based on client information. So I will define a list supported cultures, including English and French. Then, create a new Request Localization options with Set Default Culture set to English. Add supported cultures and add supported UI cultures. Finally, call app use request localization. Now let's run the app to test. Go to the product page. We can see the title has changed, and it is now fetched from our resource file using the default culture. Good. So how do we change the language to French? The idea is to create a culture selector here so we can select the language we want, and the text will change based on the selected culture. In the Base Components folder, let's create a Razor component named Culture Selector. First, I will define a culture info named Selected Culture. This component will return a select box. I will add some Bootstrap classes to style it nicely and bind it to selected culture. Then, we need a list of culture info named supported cultures. Including English and French. In the oninitialized function, set selected culture to current culture. Then loop through supported cultures. Returning each option with the name as display name and the value as culture. After selected culture changes, call the function apply selected culture. In this function, if the current culture differs from selected culture, get the URI from Navigation Manager. We need to inject Navigation Manager and get components with path and query and unescape. Then, get culture escaped and URI escaped. Finally, navigate to Culture Set with parameters Culture and Redirect URI. And set Force Load to True. Next, let's create the API to set the culture. Create a controllers folder, then create an empty controller named Culture Controller. Set the root to controller name, action name. Change the function name to set, and allow it to accept culture and redirect URI. If culture is not null, add a cookie using HTTP context response cookies. Append, passing into it, cookie request culture provider, default cookie name, and cookie request culture provider. Make cookie value with a new request culture. Then, return local redirect. Next, go to Program, Add controllers, and map the controllers with map controllers. Then, go to the Layout, Main Layout, and display the Culture Selector component in the layout. Now, let's run the app to test. Go to the product list, change the culture to French, and the title is updated to List Products in French. Nice! Now we can select the culture, and the front end is automatically updated. But we also need localization for the Web API. For example, this description, free size, is returned from the Web API, and we want to localize it. I will change this description to act as a code, then we will localize it based on this code. Let's remove the spaces here as well. Then go to the resource file, create a new resource named free size. With the value free size in English and free size in French. Then, add a reference to the common library. In Product Controller, inject iastring localizer, with the resource file being resource. Then, in Get Products, before returning the product list, I will loop through this list and set the description. If it is not null, return the localized description. Otherwise, return null. Next, in program, let's add localization. Then, add request localization, similar to how it's done in the Blazor Web App. I will copy it from the Blazor Web App and paste it into the Web API. Lastly, in API client, every time we call the API, we need to include the cookie in the HTTP client request. So in set authorize header, after everything is set, create request culture with current culture. Then, create current cookie value using make cookie value. Finally, add the cookie to default request headers. With the name default cookie name and the value culture cookie value. Now let's run the app to test. Go to the product list, and the description shows free size now. Change the culture to French, and it displays the text for the French culture. Excellent! Now we know the right way to implement localization in a Blazor Web app. You can create multiple resource files and use them in iString Localizer to retrieve the corresponding resources. If you found this useful, please comment below. It's a great motivation. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.